I see even parents, when the children are older, they think they can now talk to them about their issues. And the children, even when they're in their 20s and 30s, they don't want to hear about the problems the parents had between them.
Yeah.
They want to be kept out of the conflict, whether they're 7 or 17 or 27.
Hi, I'm Rachel Green, Brooklyn-based divorce mediator and collaborative attorney, and this is my podcast, Keep the Kids in Mind. Join me as I chat with other industry professionals about everything from smoothly navigating your way through divorce to prenups, all the while keeping the kids in mind. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us at Keep the Kids in Mind, the podcast where we talk to people whose families are in transition and try to help them to keep their kids in mind and protect them from conflicts so that they come through the whole process as strong and resilient as possible. I'm very pleased to have Jennifer Safian today as my guest. Jennifer has been a mediator for over 20 years. She mediates in 3 languages. She's very sensitive to cross-cultural communication challenges. She's an excellent mediator, and in fact, we were worked together in an alliance for a number of years. When people called and wanted to meet in Manhattan, I would refer them to Jennifer, and vice versa, since I'm in Brooklyn. Of course, now with Zoom, that's less of an issue. But Jennifer has a lot of really very interesting thoughts about how you can go through a mediation process and keep your kids in mind. Welcome, Jennifer. Thanks so much for coming to the podcast.
Thank you, Rachel. It's so nice of you to have me as your guest. Yes, we have known each other for many, many years. And I have to say that when I started in this field, I still look up to you and have reached out to you on so many occasions. You have helped me get through difficult moments because as experienced as we are, we run into situations where sometimes we need to discuss things with a colleague, and I'm not an attorney, you are an attorney, and also you've been very helpful in helping me understand some of the legal ramifications of decisions that people make. So,
well, thank you, Jennifer. Anytime, always a pleasure to talk to you. I mean, we care a lot about our work. That's one of the things about people who go into mediation. We really do want to help families get through this, make this part not as hard as what they went through before they decide to separate. They've gone through years of miscommunication, difficulty in their marriages, and now we want to try to make this part where they're finalizing the details of the separation. We want to make it as smooth and conflict-free as possible. So
that is right. And sometimes I find people in mediation are starting to talk about certain issues that they never addressed during the marriage. And they finally have a platform where they can talk about these things and we can help them resolve these issues. They've been too afraid to discuss a lot of things, finances and other issues regarding the kids. They were never comfortable enough to discuss them between them alone.
And it's tragic when I see that. I've seen that as well, and I feel like if you had found the support,
that's right,
emotional or whatever you needed to bring this up during marriage, maybe you wouldn't be sitting here with facing the end of the marriage.
That is right. That is right.
Yeah. I mean, that's when we offer mediation to stay married, which is another process that people can do where they can have a mediator. They're not planning to divorce, but they can work with a mediator to try to help them say what they need that they're not getting and resolve issues during the marriage. And that process can even end with a contract that they write up saying, from here on out, all your credit card debt is yours, or you're going to clean the kitchen 3 times a week, or whatever the issue is.
And as you as I am sure, we've been doing more prenuptial agreements. So it helps people discuss certain things before they even get married that they might not have discussed together, and put things in place so that when they start their marriage, they've already, discussed many issues that they were too afraid to discuss by themselves. And
Oh,
I think
yes.
prenups can be really helpful, not only in protecting money that they may have, but in setting forth some of the responsibilities they're each going to take during the marriage, some of the rules they want to put in place. And of course, those things change over time, but it gives them an opportunity to discuss them and makes it less of a taboo issue.
Well, prenups are so fascinating too, because people have many underlying unexplored assumptions about what they're going to do with their money, and the prenuptial mediation process allows them, gives them a forum to discuss these things and to make them explicit, so that, for example, I've had people who say, well, of course, all our accounts are going to be joint accounts. Like, what are you talking about? We're getting married. And, and their fiance says, what are you talking about? Like, we'll have a joint account, but I'm going to have my separate account so that I have privacy. If I buy you a present, I don't want you to see it on our joint credit card bill. I mean, so that's like one small example. But they may never have discussed that when they were dating and even getting engaged.
That's right.
Yeah. So I guess I have two questions. I mean, one is, what drives you to this work, Jennifer? What is it about sitting in a room with families restructuring, in conflict, yelling at each other, crying, the pain of separation, end of a long-term relationship? What is it that has attracted you to work with these families?
Well, several factors. First of all, I went through a divorce myself a long time ago with 3 young children. So I experienced personally what that was like. And had I had someone like, us, a mediator, sit with us and help us have some of these conversations, it might have made it a smoother path and allowed us to discuss certain things that we really did not discuss. So I felt
So did you have a traditional process with 2 attorneys?
It was kind of a hybrid process. We started with 2 attorneys, and then my father got involved, and it got complicated. And in the end, we had somebody that came in and helped us, both of us, but it was not really a full mediated agreement. And I was very young and didn't speak out very much. And so we kind of put in place an agreement, but without enough, in my mind, enough detail about how we were going to proceed. And so it made the beginning of the separation a little bit daunting, more than it should have been had we had put more things in place. But anyway.
So you're saying that, I'm sorry, you're saying that you had an agreement, a settlement agreement, but there were a lot of details that hadn't been discussed or addressed. So it wasn't a very thorough process. And it sounds like your father was a mediator a little bit and someone else was trying to mediate, but you didn't have one person overseeing the whole thing and making sure everything was discussed. No.
And I wasn't informed enough, and I was too scared of the whole thing. It was anyway, it worked out. We're now divorced a long time. My ex and I have a very good relationship. We have grandchildren together, and we did the kids' weddings together and all the birthday parties of the kids together, and it's been fine. But the first couple of years were really difficult. I felt that, there must be a better way. And when I looked into mediation in those years, it was not very sought after, and a lot of people didn't know what mediation was. But I wanted to get involved into the field and see if I could help people who had been in the situation like I had been, and maybe come up with better plans. I also think in my personality, like to discuss things out and don't like conflict and don't like unspoken resentments and feelings. So it was part of my personality to do this. And when I actually took my first training, it sounds a little funny, but I felt it was like my calling. This was what I was meant to do. I was meant to sit down with people and help them work through things and discuss things. And that's what I like to do. It's my passion now. And also, especially families with kids, the kids have nobody to protect them. They're in the middle between these two parents.
And they didn't ask for the divorce.
They didn't ask for this. And sometimes the parents are so caught into their own conflict that they kind of forget that the kids are there and they need protection and they need the parents to behave so that they can be protected better. And so I think this whole process is helpful to help clarify what the roles of each parent is going to be, how they should proceed, how they should work through, talking to the kids or dealing with the kids going back and forth from one home to another, not fighting in front of the children, not using the children as messengers to deliver messages to each other, not bad-mouthing each other to the kids, all these things that seem obvious, but when you're caught in your own emotional conflict, we tend to forget. It's human. And
because children feel like they're made up of half their mother and half their father. So if somebody says, "Oh, your father's so lazy," they hear that as a part of me is lazy, and that's why it hurts them. It stresses them out. And parents sometimes, I think, forget, and they might use their children as confidants. And, that's okay in some areas, but not when you're talking about your feelings about their other parent, because, allowing your children to love the other parent is a gift that you're giving to your child. I mean, in order to grow up really healthy and whole, children need to have strong relationships with both their parents. I mean, that's all the research says, those are the children who do best.
I see even parents, when the children are older, they think they can now talk to them about their issues. And the children, even when they're in their 20s and 30s, they don't want to hear about the problems the parents had between them.
Yeah.
They want to be kept out of the conflict, whether they're 7 or 17 or 27.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I had a family that I worked with where in mediation, the father found out that the mother had introduced the children to her boyfriend like almost a year earlier. And the children never breathed a word. The father knew that the mother, they were separated already for a couple of years, and the father knew that the mother had somebody that she was involved with, but didn't know that the children had met him. Father had never met him, boyfriend. And in fact, they went on vacation. The children and the mother and her new partner all went on a vacation together. Children came back, told father about vacation, never mentioned.
They had to keep the secret.
The partner, yeah. And I was like, oh my God, the stress those kids went through, like just keeping track of, every little detail, like the work of editing what you're saying so you don't mention, Bob was there. I mean, it was a very, very disturbing moment in mediation when he found that out.
Well, talking about secrets, I worked with a family where the child was too embarrassed to tell his friends at school that his parents were separated. Aww. And so he lived most with his mom, but on some days he was with his dad. So on the days that he was supposed to go to dad, if he left school with a friend, he would first go to mom's house and pretend to the child that's where he lived. And then when the friend left, then he would go to his dad's house because he was too embarrassed to say to his friend, my dad and my mom are separated and I live between two homes.
Oh, that's so sad. I mean, I would think that it's become more normalized because it's so much more common. But
this child was 13 or 14 and kept this secret. So hard.
I wonder why this kid internalized that shame. I mean, if that came from the parents, or?
I don't know. We talked about in mediation that the parents should, sit down with the child and help him voice this and work through this, or get him a therapist to help him work through this, because it's too much of a burden for the child.
It sounds like the child also felt like in some way it was his fault. I mean, right, because I always say to parents, the two things that I always say parents should tell their children are, nothing you did caused this. This is not your fault. It didn't happen because you didn't do your homework. You didn't clean your room. You didn't put your dirty socks in the laundry bin. I mean, and nothing that you did caused this. This is between me and your other parent. And that, that you'll always love them, that parents can divorce each other, but they don't divorce their children.
Right. Yeah. On another hand, I had a wonderful example of this couple who got divorced, and they decided they were going to keep a nesting arrangement until the child left for college.
Oh, nesting is where they have one primary home that the children stay in, and the parents come and go, like the birds flying in and out of the nest, so that it puts the burden of the transitions on the parents instead of the children.
They did this for 3 years, 4
Wow.
years, until the child went off to college. So the child remained in the home, which was the marital home, the family home originally. And the parents took turns. They didn't stay in the same outside residence. The mother stayed in one home that she kept in the divorce, the country house. And the father stayed at his parents'. And so they didn't have to share the outside home. In some, I've seen nesting arrangements where people do, just for the first year, they get an outside studio, 1 bedroom, and they take turns living there. But in this case, they had made arrangements so that each had a separate place to stay when they were outside. And this was so beneficial to the child that the child didn't have to go back and forth. But it's difficult. It's a sacrifice on part of the parents.
Yeah, because then the parents are going back and forth.
Right.
And they have all the, the stress of moving, and, I left my whatever, I left my work report at the other house. I have to go pick it up before I go to work.
But they didn't want the child to have to do that. So they did.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although they do say, I remember I read a list in an article of positive things that come out of divorce for children. And one of them is, they said that children of divorce tend to be more organized because they, the majority of them do have the experience of going back and forth. And so they keep track of their belongings a little more diligently than other children tend to do.
I guess the circumstances push them to do that, right?
Right.
Yeah. Did you see during COVID there were some interesting arrangements that parents made? And I worked with a couple who had already separated. They kept a joint country home that they were going to alternate using, either weekly or biweekly. And then COVID erupted, and they decided to all move into the country home with the children so that they could each work and at the same time share helping the children do their schoolwork on Zoom and do their homework remotely. It was such an amazing situation where they really both said, this is a time in crisis where we have to, put the family temporarily together and join our forces to help our kids.
Yeah, I saw a number of examples of that as well. I think people also wanted to get out of the city. So people who had a vacation home, a second home, felt like it was a safer environment with less dense population.
That is correct.
Right. And I saw a number of parents, it was almost like they were doing nesting, but not leaving the nest. They would have their days on duty with helping the kids with Zoom, school, and homework, and making dinner, and etc. And then they'd have days where they were just, each working, and the other parent was in charge of the children. I had a number of families who did that, but then other problems arose. As the pandemic wound down, I had 2 or 3 couples that I was working with where one parent had decided, like, hey, I like it out here. I can work remotely. I don't want to go back to the city. And the other parent said, what are you talking about? This was temporary. It was always temporary. We never intended to relocate to, Cooperstown or Woodstock or Rochester.
That was hard.
Yeah. So other conflicts arose.
Another couple I had, they were separated already and living completely separately. They didn't have this space where they could go all together. They had 2 children. And so in the afternoons after school, each parent would take one child to work to help them with their homework. So they wouldn't both have both children. And that, I think, made it easier for both of them to do that. And then in the evening, the children would sleep at whichever parents they had agreed to together.
Yeah. I'm surprised people don't do that more often, because I think it's so nice for the children to have one-on-one time.
That's right.
Parents. And there's an odd number of days in the week, so that can be a solution. Each parent can have 3 days where they have both kids, and then they alternate. And then one day where they only have one kid, or, one kid and 2 kids, and they rotate them around if they have 3 kids. It could be worked out, but it seems like it's so nice to have that one-on-one time with your child. Maybe I should be suggesting that more often as an option. Just to remind them that that's an option.
Well, it's always nice to see people, even though they're going through conflict and they're having a very hard time, they put the children at the forefront of their decisions, and they whatever's best for the kids, they're going to try and work it out that way. And that's always the best way. Unfortunately, as we said before, it doesn't happen. I had one family where the child was having a bar mitzvah, and the parents could not be in the same space. So they held 2 different parties. The mother had one and the father had one. And each of them invited whoever they wanted to invite. And so the child had to have 2 different bar mitzvah parties, one with each parent.
Oh my gosh.
And you would think that kids they like parties, but in this case, this child did not like this.
Did the child's friends also go to 2 parties, or did he split his friends up and half of them came to one party? And
I think,
or did he have no friends?
Each parent gave the child a number of friends that he could invite. I don't know if they invited the same ones or all different ones, but it was just so painful to watch. They just couldn't be in the same space, these parents.
Yeah, I had a very high conflict parent coordination case a number of years ago, where the one parent lived in Brooklyn, the other parent lived in Staten Island, which is really a schlep, and an expensive schlep, because you have to go over the Verrazano Bridge, which is a high cost. But these parents really couldn't be in this, same room. They couldn't agree to anything. And it was a little girl, and she was taking dance, and she had one dance class after school in Staten Island and one dance class after school each week in Brooklyn. And then she had the recitals, and they were on, there was one weekend where she had a recital on Saturday at one studio and a Sunday at another studio, and she was 6 years old and just running around doing these 2 dance studios because the parents couldn't even agree. Okay, we'll send our kid to this studio. It was really the parents and their own power struggles. And they felt like, she can't take dance in Staten Island, then she's ignoring the whole Brooklyn half of herself. It was, I was just astonished when I heard that they would put this little child through so much stress.
That's really hard.
But, it's important for people to try to remember that their children are separate people.
That's
that
right.
the children are not just an extension of the parent. And that's the challenge, you know, I think psychologically to understand that can be a challenge for some people.
Definitely. Do you find when you work with parents who have adult children, do you find there are as many conflicts, or do they involve the children more? Have you what experience have you had with that, if any?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I mean, I know that adults whose parents divorce still have very, very strong feelings
Yeah,
about their parents having divorced, and they still see themselves as children of divorce, even though they're adults. Um, and then, of course, there's also, you know, always the what are the circumstances? I mean, there are many people who I'm sorry, the garbage truck is going by. There's a lot of noise. There are many people who say, you know, when their parents get divorced in their 20 and they're in their 20s, and they say, I wish they got divorced 20 years ago. You
sure.
know, I lived in that house and heard them fighting and saw the conflict, and you know, we had no joy from them being together. I don't know why they waited so long. And then, you know, so those people bear the scars of growing up in a home where there's a lot of conflict. Um, and then I mean, certainly in mediation, parents with adult children are not talking about the children as much. There's just not logistically as much to do. I mean, I have had parents argue about, are we putting money aside for the weddings or the down payment on the house, or are we buying them a car when they graduate college or not, you know? But you know, as a general rule, the children aren't the subject of the mediation discussion when they're older. In my experience. How about you?
But I've heard adult children, a couple of cases, adult children complaining. It wasn't in mediation, but people that I knew, that now they felt responsible for the parent.
Mm.
My parents are getting divorced, and now my mom is like at a loss, and now I'm going to have to deal with her and take care of her and be responsible for her. And they really don't want that burden, because
Yeah,
they're starting their
true.
own lives, they're starting their own families, and they want to be free to, work on their jobs and have kids. And now they have this single parent who's weighing on them, and that can be really hard.
Yeah, that can be really hard. And I remember a program that the New York City Council put on a number of years ago, where that was about adult children of divorce, and you know, several people talked about when a parent passed away, the first parent to pass away, that usually, if parents are still married, the surviving parent deals with all their stuff and you know, probably dealt with their care in their last years of life. And now this all fell on the adult children, and it was going to fall on the adult children when the second parent passed away as well.
Right.
You know, so it's almost like the divorce lasts forever, you know, through their lives.
Right. That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
As I work, as you mentioned, that I'm trilingual, I work with a lot of international families. There's added issues that come up. Sometimes I've worked with a lot of French-speaking families. My first language was French. And it's frequent that they came to the US because the husband had a job offer here. The wife and the kids followed. And then when they get divorced, the wife says, I want to go back home with the children. And then they have to work out a even more complicated agreement, because then the father is still in his job in the US. The mom is back in Europe, in France with the kids. When is the father going to see the children? How often are the kids going to be able to spend time with their dad? Which vacations, which holidays? So it adds another dimension to the agreements. And I've done quite a few of those, and it can be a little bit complicated, but they come up, people who travel for their jobs are a little more used to being thrown all over the world. But for the kids, it's hard. It's hard because they are separated from one parent for extended time. And now, of course, with FaceTime and all of that, they can see them and speak to them, but it's still hard that they can't.
Yeah. I mean, the FaceTime is much better than it used to be, but it doesn't solve the problem. It's not the same as being with your child, giving them a bath, giving them a hug.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So we do a lot of those agreements in mediation.
Yeah. And that's interesting because I've also seen that international issue come up a number of times. And I've had parents who say, okay, I understand why you want to go back to our country of origin. And then I've had parents who say, no, you're not taking the kids. They're staying here. Yeah. And it's very tough. I mean, I've had that also come up just with living in New York City because it's so crowded and expensive to live here. And the parents decide to separate. And one of them says, oh, well, gee, I only came to New York City for you and your career.
That's right.
I want to go back and live in Baltimore. I could buy a 4-bedroom house in Baltimore for the price of a studio apartment in Manhattan. And, and I have a yard and a garage and I just want that lifestyle. And that's very hard. That's very hard to, I guess any relocation issue is very challenging to mediate because in some ways it's a zero-sum issue.
Yeah, it is. But that's what we're here for, to help these people work through these issues, right?
Yes. So I would say they're lucky to have you, Jennifer.
As you. Because
you're a very thoughtful, caring mediator. Wow. And I guess I thank you for coming on the podcast. It's been great to talk to you about these important issues that affect these families that we work with, and just keep the kids in mind.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for having me.